we'll start. So welcome everyone to our Friday Center for Transportation Studies Transportation Seminar. And welcome everyone. My name is Jennifer Dell. I'm a faculty member here in the School of Urban Studies and Planning, and along with my colleagues, Chris Monsieur, John Glebe, and Rob Bertini, we organize this weekly seminar. And I will remind people, and particularly people who are new, that we do webcast the seminars. And because of that, we ask that when you ask questions, to use the microphones, which are positioned on most of the desks. A few of them do not work, but keep the touch button touched with the red light lit while you're asking the question so that the people watching on the web can hear your question and then hear the insightful answer that our speaker undoubtedly will give. Today I'm going to ask that you hold questions to the end. We have two speakers today. We're quite excited. For the next 3 weeks, actually, of the seminar, we're going to have our own graduate students presenting the results of their field area project work that they've been doing over the past several months. So today we have two speakers, and I'm just going to go ahead and introduce them both now, and then the second speaker will come up when he's ready. So we have Rory Renfro, who is finishing up his Master's of Urban and Regional Planning degree here at PSU. He's going to be talking about bicycle and pedestrian overcrossings. And then we have Max Coffman, also a second-year graduating MURP student, who's going to be talking about fare payment integration. And with that,
Okay, well, you guys get the preview, and the internet folks don't. But anyways, just again, I wanted to take a look at pedestrian bicycle overcrossings because they are a critical element of bike and ped networks, but there just isn't a whole lot of information out there about them, so I thought this would be a good research opportunity to take a look at them. So today, and there's a lot of slides, lots of photos, so I'm going to kind of go fairly quickly. Just going to basically talk about the purpose of the study and what it's all about. It has basically two large components: location elements, where does the bridge exist within the overall bicycle pedestrian network, and also just the design elements as well that contribute to a bridge that either works well or doesn't work so well for pedestrians and bicyclists. And then just kind of conclude with some lessons learned that might be used for future bridges. So first of all, and this is kind of a delay here, it's kind of a large file. There we go. These overcrossings serve a variety of users, whether you're commuting to work, whether you're just on a recreational ride, if you're a walker, a jogger, a person in a wheelchair. Depending on who you are, these serve as critical links in a bicycle pedestrian network. So there's a variety of users out there to first of all consider when we're talking about this subject. So bridges can be built to serve a variety of purposes. They can be built in an area where a major barrier, such as a big wide arterial street, separates two adjacent neighborhoods. They can be built in areas where there are railroad crossings, and this is very important to consider because oftentimes there'll be areas where pedestrians and bicyclists want to travel, but there's just a lot of at-grade train crossings going on. Trains are stopping sometimes, blocking the passageway. And there are also policies out there that railroad administrations are implementing that really limit the amount of new at-grade crossings that can be built. So we're working within a limited system here. So bridges represent an opportunity to overcome those major barriers like railroads. There are also instances where there are just those big wide surface streets out there that there are lots of at-grade crossing opportunities to walk across the street right there on the foot, but they may just not necessarily be that attractive for a variety of reasons, whether it's a lot of traffic on the street, it's 5 o'clock, there's hardly any gaps, or just the crossings are unsafe, maybe no signals or anything like that. There is a little bit of background information out there that touches on overcrossings. There's a variety of design guides out there that are published by federal and state agencies, really pertaining to pedestrian and bicycle facilities in general, and then they'll contain a little small section on bridges that may be a paragraph or two long. So there is some stuff out there, and it is informative, but there just isn't a whole lot out there yet. So these serve as good background information along with some case studies that I was able to track down. And there isn't a whole lot of academic literature out there yet. So there was an inventory that was conducted by me, actually, of about 30 bridges, 25 of them in the Portland metro area, 4 of them down in the Eugene area, and then just to mix it up a little bit, added one from the Puget Sound region up in Washington. Ranging from the very old bridges built in the 1930s and 40s, to the very new bridges that have been built within the last couple of years. So there's a lot of variation out there, a lot of variation in terms of how long they are and how short they are as well. And for each bridge, went out there and took a look at various individual components, ranging from where they are within the surrounding bicycle pedestrian network, how do they connect with those destinations that are on either side, and also some of those little more detailed design components for each bridge. So a detailed inventory was taken for each of these structures, and then the report really summarizes everything based on these site visits out there. For the 30 bridges that I took a look at, they could basically be classified into 4 different types of categories, basic in terms of really of what they cross. Most of them cross freeways or major surface streets with high traffic volumes. A lot of them cross railroad tracks. And then there's also waterway crossings, whether it be a creek or a river. So the first part of this report focuses on some of the location elements. Like I mentioned earlier, where does the bridge lie within the surrounding network, and does it connect well with the destinations? So really, what it focuses on is its situation within an overall bicycle pedestrian network. Is it on a logical walking and bicycling route that people are going to want to use? And second of all, where is it in relation, and how does it fare when compared to other opportunities, like other crossing opportunities, like at-grade crossings, street crossings, or other bridges down the road? So in taking a look at how these bridges and overcrossings in general perform out there, there's some basic intuitive things that we probably could figure out on our own. Basically, for instance, bridges located within a fairly well-connected street grid lend themselves to being closer to areas that are within reasonable walking and bicycling distances, like schools, parks, neighborhood centers, commercial areas, things like that. Whereas if a bridge is sited in an area with a circuitous street network with cul-de-sacs and things like that, really that kind of limits the amount of destinations that can be located, within a reasonable walking and bicycling distance. And this is just an example here. Except for the freeway, of course, that's being crossed, this bridge is within a relatively well-connected street grid. If you're on the bridge, you can reach a relatively higher number of destinations within reasonable walking distance and bicycling distance. Whereas in a location like this, the number of places that you can reach within that reasonable walking distance, whatever that is, it's often based on who you are, it tends to be a little less. So in areas that we have limited street connectivity, people start blazing their own trails to find the shortest route to the bridge. So you'll see a lot of informal paths, goat trails, demand paths, whatever you want to call it. This is kind of in response to bridges that aren't really located on a logical walking and bicycling route. So in talking about the surrounding bicycle pedestrian network, like I mentioned earlier, we're talking about the network as a whole, zooming out a little bit. and also talking about those connections right there between the bridge and the surrounding street system or path system. We can have a bridge that is in a great location, but if there's if there aren't any good facilities leading up to it, the attractiveness of the bridge might be diminished a little bit. So those are really important things to consider, and we're going to talk about these in a little more detail. So just some examples of facilities that are located within reasonable walking and bicycling distances to bridges. Facilities include things like shared use paths, bicycle lanes and sidewalks. These are also important. And in some areas, we'll have things like this where we have a bridge surrounding by a transportation network that doesn't really have many pedestrian and bicycle facilities. So for some folks, this might be okay, but for others, especially young children or families out there, this might not be as attractive, and hence using the bridge might not be as attractive as well. Kind of zooming in now to facilities immediately adjacent to the bridge, those are really important as well. Things like intersection treatments. How do pedestrians coming off the bridge interact with other transportation users like cars and things like that? So it can be things like intersection treatments here, but also just immediate connections to the bridge itself. So we've got a nice access ramp there, but a person in a wheelchair might have a little difficulty getting to that access ramp. So it's really thinking about those logical connections outside and then moving in and getting closer. Those are all equally important. Wayfinding is also another critical component, especially for those bridges that may not necessarily be on a logical bicycling and walking route. In going out there and checking out these bridges, I discovered a bunch of them that I never even knew it existed, either because they were just hidden off in a forest or something, or they were just in an area that wasn't really on a through bicycle and pedestrian route that's popular among non-motorized users. So wayfinding is a really important element, not only in getting to the bridge and to access destinations away from the bridge, but also to delineate certain access routes for certain users, like wheelchair users and things like that. So the all-important decision, crossing at grade, using the street crossing or using the bridge, there's a lot of different things that go into the decision-making process among the pedestrian or the bicyclist. For instance, the barrier being crossed. Sometimes that's already decided for you. If you're trying to cross a river, unless you want to swim, you're probably going to use the bridge. But also the bridge's location relative to where you want to go. If you're going, are you going to have to deviate a half mile off your desired travel route to get to a bridge? That's going to be a choice that people are going to weigh. If there are alternative crossing opportunities, maybe if there's an at-grade crossing that is right there on your travel path, people are going to use that in their decision-making process as well as anything that would physically block you from crossing the street as well, like a concrete barrier or signage or anything like that. And also, if you're at a street that just has a lot of traffic in the 5 o'clock rush hour, that also might inform the decision as well. So there is a little bit of information out there that gets in a little bit into the numbers of this, into the details. Institute of Transportation Engineers did a study back in '98, basically in evaluating the user decisions when they get to a bridge or an at-grade crossing. So you can just read this here, but basically it's just saying if the distance required to get over to that bridge and then get back, once it gets longer than acceptable distance to you, most pedestrians and bicyclists are going to forget about it and find another way to get across the bridge. So here's an example here where a person has the choice of using the loop ramp here or crossing the freeway on-ramp. So they take all these factors into consideration. How long is it going to take for me to do that whole trip across the loop ramp versus how long is it going to take to dart across that freeway on-ramp? Also, are there a lot of cars coming through? So they're weighing all these different options. And in this case, it was kind of 50-50. People were using the bridge, but there were also people just opting to ignore it and cross the street there.
So you were, I'm sorry.
Oh,
On a previous slide, when you were observing, did you see any wheelchair users?
not on this bridge. Bicyclists, yes.
Where's the bridge? I thought you said.
Lombard at I-5 up in North Portland. So we've talked about some of the location elements, the bridge's location relative to other things, but there's also a lot of design elements to consider. One of them being, how do you actually get onto the bridge structure itself? So we're talking about all the different access types like ramps and stairs and switchbacks and things like that. And there's also other considerations that we'll talk about in a moment. So this came from the Oregon Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan. Basically, this is intended to illustrate that the type of access provision to get to a bridge, whether it is a stairway, whether it is a switchback ramp or a nice big curvy ramp, is often determined by the bridge's relative location to the natural ground line. In other words, do you have to go up to get across and then get back down, or can the bridge just cross something that's, depressed below the natural ground line? Typically, if you look at the third graphic, the one on the bottom, that's just an example of a bridge sitting on relatively flush with the natural ground line, so we don't need any big, long access ramps or anything like that. But in a lot of cases, the barrier being crossed, maybe a freeway or a road, is right there on the natural ground line, so you do got to go up and then come back down. Just an example here, the freeway in this case is depressed below the natural ground line, so we don't really need a whole lot of lengthy access ramps to get across. We can just kind of go straight across along the natural ground line. In this case, though, we have to go up to get over and then get back down. So now we got to start talking about ways to get up to that bridge, and there's a whole lot of different ways to do it. One way is just straight linear access ramps, just straight up and straight down. Fairly easy for most users, bicyclists, pedestrians, wheelchair users. Pretty easy to do when you're not space constrained. More rural areas that don't have a lot of development surrounding the bridge, pretty easy to accomplish. These are great, but one of the drawbacks of these bridges is that when it comes way down, it often hits the ground at a place pretty far away from where the bridge structure was. So if you're trying to reach a destination that's close to the bridge structure, like a bus stop in this example, you kind of got to go down and then backtrack to come back. So there's pros and cons to this type of access treatment here. Oh, the switchback ramp. Okay. These are at a lot of bridges out there, and they're pretty self-explanatory. They're used to help facilitate easy travel for wheelchair users to get from the ground line up to the bridge. ADA requirements and a lot of other things dictate the grade of the slope and level landings and things like that. These are used by both bicyclists and wheelchair users. But bicyclists tend to get a little frustrated sometimes with these. One, because they're often pretty narrow. Two, because they're often required to negotiate these relatively tight 180-degree turns in a tight spot. And three, just the distance to do this really adds up. So here's an example of a bridge here, and just imagine you're a bicyclist on the top of the bridge and you're going to go down to the street. You get to take a right here and then double back here. One more time. Let's do it again. Hang a left, hang a right, another right, and another right, and you're down on the street. And if you're in a wheelchair, you get a bonus turn to get over to the sidewalk. So as you can see, we're starting to add up distances here. And in cases like this, the cyclist may or may not choose to use the bridge in the first place. Now, switchback ramps can be designed to perform relatively well if they're wide and they have these big, nice turning radii, so you can still facilitate easy turning movements for the bicyclists. But a switchback is a switchback. This is the Esplanade. You've probably seen this. People are still doing this. This is still happening on the Esplanade here. So again, benefits and drawbacks of these different access types. Curvilinear ramps, just big, broad turns. These work well in areas where you have a lot of space to work within. They're good because the slope is pretty gentle, good for wheelchair users and bicyclists. Again, though, we've got it's fairly curvilinear, a little bit of out of direction for some people. And users respond to this by blazing their own trails. And in this case, not only have we blazed our own trail up the hill, but we've also cut a hole in the fence to get to the bridge. So it's one of my favorite ones. Yeah, it's in Vancouver. Spiral ramps are just another smaller version of the curvilinear access ramp. They work well in space-constrained areas, just kind of a tighter turns, and these work pretty well at facilitating slow but still continuous travel for wheelchair users and bicyclists, fairly direct for pedestrians. The only drawback of this is there's sometimes sight distance issues with those tight curves. Sometimes you might not be able to see a person coming at you from the other way. Stairways, pretty self-explanatory, the easiest and most direct route for able-bodied pedestrians. Most people will use them if they can. The problem is if they're the only way to get to a bridge, we've now knocked out access for a lot of users like bicyclists and wheelchair users. That isn't to say that stairs can't be made to work for other users. In this case, we've added a bike gutter to the stairwell where you can just put your bike in there and push it up on a nice smooth line. So in this case, we've at least accommodated other users to an extent. Finally, in the most constrained of spaces, elevators can serve everybody's needs. Just one thing to consider is the maintenance issues and things like that associated with facilities like this. And just one final thought on out-of-direction travel. Some bridges are basically, or I should say, the perception of out-of-direction travel often is determined on the orientation of the ramps and things like that. So in this example, we've got a bridge with some stairways, and if you're a pedestrian here trying to get over to the other side over there, it's a fairly direct route. It's not too bad. But if you're over here, trying to get over here, you can start to see that getting a little loop-de-loop and starting to add up in terms of distance. Some people might not be attracted to that. They might just choose to dart across the street. So it's really important to not only consider the type of access that you're providing, but also where are you orienting it to. Just some other design considerations that I'll hit on really quick that go into the bridge as well. Widths. Generally, wider bridges are better bridges. They minimize conflicts between users. Folks can pass each other with relative ease. Sometimes people want to stop on a bridge to take a look at the water or something that's being crossed. They can accommodate emergency vehicles if needed. Width should also, wide bridges also need wide access ramps and stairs as well to make those connections. So in this case, it's a relatively narrow bridge. It's okay for basically one user, but this person might have a little trouble if they are encountering people coming at him. Whereas in this location, it's a wider bridge that lends itself to easier use among different modes and different users and things like that. Overhead clearances, basically higher is better, just to minimize the perception of narrowness and that tunnel effect. Maintenance and emergency vehicles as well. So this is a bridge where we not only have a narrow width, but we also got a pretty low overhead clearance. And this is in a forested area with not that much lighting. So you can imagine at night it might be kind of an issue, or even in a, on a dark day as well. Whereas here we just have it's a little different feeling when you're on this bridge with a wider cross section, a little more overhead clearance to work within as well. Grades, steeper grades equal shorter ramps, but of course that conflicts with access for mobility impaired users. The ADA sets forth requirements regarding slopes and things like that. So in this case, we have a bridge that's got a relatively short ramp, but it's pretty darn steep, and there are no landings on this ramp. So pretty easy for able-bodied walkers, and bicyclists. But if you're in a wheelchair, that can be somewhat difficult to navigate.
What's that location, the last one?
This is Southwest Hooker Street at Nadeau Parkway, about a mile from here. So this is an example of a bridge that or a ramp that does incorporate the elements needed to facilitate access for persons in wheelchairs and other mobility devices and things like that, railings and landings. Obstructions. This was the funnest part because there are so many interesting things out there. Obstructions, basically anything that constrains the ability for you to get past something on a bridge. We're talking about things that may have been designed into the bridge itself or things that may be maintenance related. This is the best one. So we probably, when this bridge was built back in the 50s, the idea was probably to make bicyclists dismount and walk their bikes across. The distance between those two bars is about 30 inches, so if you're in a wheelchair, you're probably not using this bridge. This is another great one. You come off a bridge and right into a sidewalk without a ramp, and then there's a parked car there. It's just some of these little things that can really make or break the experience for the user. Yeah. This is a great one. A bridge that's not covered, and we've got a nice overhead electrical wire here. And just don't stop and stretch when you get to the top of those stairs. I thought this was great, just so funny. And I thought, okay, I've seen it once, this is funny. And then to the next bridge I went to had the exact same thing. So this is happening in a couple of places. Other things, these are just maintenance related, vegetation encroaching into the area and weeds going into the pavement as well. Surface conditions, very important when we're talking about being in a wheelchair, on a bicycle, things like that really matter to the wheel users. We're talking about the pavement, expansion joints and the drainage grates and manhole covers, things like that. So this is a bridge that was built not too long ago, and perhaps this happened when the bridge was built, or maybe the pavement settled, but we got a pretty large lip here that can be an inconvenience if you're on a bike, but can make or break the experience if you're in a wheelchair. Expansion joint, just another example of potentially an inconvenient bump on a bike, but a potential issue for other users. Drainage grates usually work best when they're out of the travel way to prevent bicycle tires from getting caught or any other small wheels from getting caught in there. But when they do need to be within the travel way of the bridge, it helps to have them flush with the pavement as well and have the inlets pretty small so as not to catch a wheel or anything like that. Fences, walls, and railings, ADA requirements, ADA spells out requirements for these as well, and they're used for a variety of reasons. Railings, just an example of railings on both sides of new bridges. Some of the older bridges maybe have them on one side, and on others, they just don't have them at all, kind of on your own there. So just, yeah, it just varies by bridge and by age too. Lighting is key. It should be at the human scale, oriented towards the bridge user. When you have to rely on lights that are oriented towards the street, they don't always really provide enough lighting for the bridge, and that can pose some safety and security and just overall comfort issues for the user.
Did you find a minimum ambient light level for these facilities? A standard?
I don't think I did. No. This is an example of just lighting that is actually oriented towards the bridge user. But lighting only works when it's there. So maintenance is another issue as well. We've talked about location and design elements, but bridges can serve a whole lot of other functions. They can serve as architectural icons and community gathering places. They can really make it a pleasurable experience to use. This is an example in Austin, Texas, where a lot of detail went into the design process and probably a lot of money went into it as well. But as you can see, we've added some elements that make this bridge not only a means to get across something, but just also a destination in itself as well. And some bridges here in the Portland area and in Eugene as well address some of this using architectural details. And then there's this example. We've got some little viewing areas for people to get off the path and really make the bridge an experience. So just kind of wrapping up, lessons learned. Bridges should be located where they're going to actually be used on a walking and bicycling route. It's important to have pedestrian and bicycle facilities not only near the bridge, but it's also equally important to have those connections to and from the bridge in the street system. People are going to hold bridges to a higher standard if there are a lot of other crossing opportunities right there in the immediate area. So a lot of even more consideration needs to be used in the design and location of bridges in those types of environments. It really helps if you can keep bridges as flush with the natural ground line as you can so as to minimize the need for lengthy access ramps and things like that. And in terms of providing bridge access, when you do need to go up and get over and get down, it's important to just provide a lot of choices. It's okay to use stairs. Stairs work just fine, but it's also important to include those other access provisions for other users. And finally, just addressing all those other elements like the clearances and the grades and all those other things that they're each their own component, but they add up to make or break a bridge experience. And as we saw in some of those more recent slides, bridges can be built and designed to serve multiple purposes. They can become community gathering places and destinations in and of themselves. Maintenance is probably one of the cheapest things that could be done, but it could be one of the most effective things on a bridge, ranging from just sweeping away debris, cleaning up glass, graffiti, things like that. We should really work to improve basically the system that we got. Even though we have bridges out there that were built in the 30s and 40s, they're still being used by lots of folks. And we should really identify opportunities to make those bridges even better so we can get more bang for our buck out there. But there are also very important considerations to think about when we're building new bridges. And we're not talking about just pedestrian bicycle overcrossings in and of themselves, but there's a lot of other things, even vehicle bridges, that some of these considerations could be integrated with. So we've got a lot of them going on now with the Selwood Bridge, Columbia River Crossing. A number of proposed trails in the Portland metro area would incorporate pedestrian bicycle bridges. So it really represents an opportunity at the very beginning stages of designing and planning for those facilities to really design something that's top-notch for everybody. So with that, I know it's kind of quick, but that concludes it, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Excuse me. Kind of a question and a comment. Excuse me. For the room, maybe. What is the current ADA code on ramp, on the gradient for the ramp?
Don't quote me on this, but it's usually 5% grade with level landings. You can go up to about 8% for short segments.
And if for all you designers and planners in the room, if I could just add one comment, being as I'm the guy in the wheelchair here, but that's a good gradient for short distances, short lengths up. But if you have a very long ramp at the max grade that you're going at, it gets kind of exhausting after a period of time. So if you find yourself designing long ramps in the future, if you have to do a steep grade, do it for a short period of time, level off, short period of time, level off. Now they build some of those things in, but they hardly do it long enough, in my opinion. I just wanted to throw that out to the
Follow-up question to that. When you were surveying users, perhaps, or if you discussed this with anyone, those level landings for ADA, I know they can be also a hazard for cyclists, like the Esplanade. Mm-hmm. Did you get any feedback on that issue? And
Not really. I asked somebody out on the Padden Parkway. There's a bridge on Padden Parkway at I-205, and basically that one has ramps that go straight up and straight down, no switchbacks, but it has landings. So when you're riding down, especially when you're going down here, it's a lot of bump, 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 bump. I asked somebody about that, and they just said that it's kind of an uncomfortable ride. They didn't mention anything about safety or anything like that. Yeah.
What type of observations did you do? How long did you observe the bridges and things like that? And did you count how many people were going across the bridges, or what type of method did you use other than just going out and looking at the bridge, or is that?
I spent about an hour and a half out at each bridge, and I hesitated to do any sort of counting because the times that I were out there were all over the place, ranging from 5 o'clock on a weekday, where I'm seeing a lot of folks using these things, to 9 a.m. on a Sunday when I'm the only guy out there. And that actually brings up another point. I wanted to integrate things like cost estimates and volume data for these bridges, but that was nearly impossible to get simply because counts have hardly ever been taken on a lot of these bridges. There just isn't a whole lot of bike ped volume data out there. And the costs of these bridges, oftentimes the bridge was built as part of a huge transportation project, like a freeway corridor. So it's hard for the agencies to, pair out or, bring out that cost estimate data. So there were some data collection limitations in this.
What about general trends when you were just there for the hour and a half? Did you notice that, like, if one person would not use the bridge, would the other person just kind of follow in their footsteps and not use the bridge too? Did you notice that at all, or?
I don't know. I think, again, that was kind of all over the map. You know, people like at I-84 at Hollywood Transit Center with the 7 switchbacks, there were some guys on the bikes that said, fine, I'll do it. You know, they would ride up and down. It would take them a little while, but then 5 seconds later, someone would come and carry their bikes down the stairs. Not very consistent at all.
I guess I just had a couple of comments. You might want to think about adding to your thought process a couple design considerations, and one would be safety and security. And you notice the old bridges that have solid sides. So from, you know, someone using that in the evening or early morning, there could, you know, there's what I call the lurking potential. So these days, facilities are designed to be much more open so that there are viewpoints from all around to create the feeling of security and safety for that neighborhood. So one thought might be, should we be retrofitting these old ones and putting new barriers on the sides that are transparent? So I think safety and security is a big thing.
That has been done on a couple of older bridges out there where they've gone in and added fencing that fully encloses the bridge, and it's more of a mesh style, so you can still have that transparency.
It goes with elevators. Elevators nowadays in public spaces are all usually glass, so there are no solid door elevators used at transit stations or head crossings anymore. But the other category is how you dump people out at the bottom. And on one of your examples, I noticed you had them dumped perpendicular to the arterial, and what the standard nowadays is to use a Z style. Mm-hmm. So you dump people out so that they're facing oncoming traffic, whether it's railroad traffic, light rail, or vehicular traffic. So if traffic is moving this way, you'd have them end so that when they come out, if they're on a wheelchair or a bike or on foot, they don't, you know, with their back to traffic, kind of make the wrong turn. So usually Z crossings are the standard for how we approach hazardous crossing conditions at the ends of these facilities. So you might want to make a note of that in your paper.
Yeah.
Yes, another question. Given all the good bridges you've seen, I'm part of the subcommittee for the I-5 Bike and Ped Design Group. What bridge would you recommend that we should look at, say, if we wanted to make it a world-class facility? I mean, the Austin Bridge looked quite nice,
Yeah.
the 20 to 30-foot esplanade across the Columbia.
By world-class, are you talking about just a pleasant experience or functional?
All the above.
I knew this was going to come up. Yeah, what's your favorite bridge?
So you're prepared then.
My favorite bridge is the one that works well for everyone. No, I can't say that I saw one there was one bridge, you know, that solved all the problems.
Top three then.
Top three. I liked the Peter DeFazio Bridge in Eugene, fairly new bridge. It's nice and wide. The access is pretty nice. There's some viewing areas. It's architecturally nice, at least in my opinion. What else? The Springwater 3 Bridge just kind of has a nice little architectural element to it. I don't know. I'm hesitant to pick my favorite bridges. The Austin, Texas one is a great one. The James Pfluger with a PF on that pedestrian bicycle bridge. That was a great one just because it has a lot of good access provisions, but it also is just a great place to be on a weekend too. So, and we can talk offline. I can show you all the bridges that were out there too.
You said there wasn't much data as far as just pedestrian bridges go, but how about how pedestrian bridges might affect traffic safety and safety to motor vehicles?
Are you talking in terms of like vehicle pedestrian conflicts and stuff like that?
Both those conflicts as well as motor vehicle to motor vehicle, as far as maybe avoiding pedestrian. Is there any articles or journal essays out on that?
Gosh, not much. I'm just thinking of bridges that are out there today that have been put into place to basically eliminate at-grade pedestrian crossing behaviors. Southeast Powell at 9th Avenue is an example. There's a signal a few blocks down the road at Milwaukee Avenue, but if you're trying to get across Powell at 9th or anywhere in that area near the bridge, a lot of people don't want to go all the way down there to cross and they get back. So that bridge was built with the purpose, at least that's what my thinking is to basically separate everybody. The problem with that is it's got some circuitous ramps that high school students getting across to and from this, each side of the street are darting across the road anyway. So it's, there's just a lot going on. I haven't seen a whole lot in terms of the literature, except for things like what AASHTO and ODOT and WashDOT have to say, but it's not much out there.
I have a question from a web viewer in Iran, actually. Did you look at any underpasses, and did you talk to anybody that had, or did you find anything that had any preferences for either underpasses or bridges because of psychological reasons?
I didn't look at underpasses. In reading, though, I found that the one advantage of underpasses is that they often require shorter ramps to get down, because a bridge, if it's going over a road, has to meet minimum vertical clearances for cars, trucks, trains, things like that. Usually, somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 to 23 feet or something like that. An underpass, it just needs to meet a minimum vertical clearance to get you under without, banging your head. Usually 10 feet or so. So those ramps can be shorter. That's the one advantage of underpasses that I found, but I didn't do any research on underpasses for this project. I think we got one here.
There was a picture of a bridge where you have to make lots of turns. You showed that with the arrows. So I wonder, why did it look like that? I mean, why is it not just a linear bridge, or where you have to make a turn just once or twice, not several times? I mean, it was like going back and forth until you reach your destination.
I don't know. And what's weird about that's a pretty new bridge. And there seems to be a fair amount of public right-of-way on that street, but there are houses on either side and driveways. So I think if you were trying to do a ramp straight down, you might be blocking driveways. I don't know why or the reasoning for that. So
A good facility to add to your collection, Fremont in Seattle. They've made the ADA ramps as part of a plaza, so it functions as an amphitheater. They've spaced out the ramps so they have a dual use instead of just a tight corkscrew.
Well, thank you very much, Rory.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll have a short transition, and Max Coffman will now join us.
All right, so I've found some initial findings, and I've got another couple weeks left to write and rearrange my thoughts if I see fit. So I'm hoping that I can ask you guys some questions at the end of this and see whether how I've arranged things makes sense. I initially got into this topic because I wanted to study about car sharing and see what kinds of things we could do to help car sharing fare better against the other modes that we have in the region. And that quickly became challenging for me because the data wasn't particularly available. So I found that integrating car-sharing payment into the greater scheme of transportation payment was a great way that we could go about doing this. And if I've learned one thing in grad school, it's that you should give away the ending right away when you're making a presentation. So my conclusions as they stand are that we should develop a single transportation payment mechanism for all modes of travel, that car-sharing groups should be the most vocal champions because I think they have a lot to gain, and they already use a very flexible tool in their payment system. And also that the growing use of smart card systems in the financial sector will be a great opportunity for this kind of thing going forward. And so one of the main questions that I'm going to be asking you at the end of this is, does the focus on car sharing make sense in context of the rest of the presentation? So with that, let's talk about car sharing. So car sharing was born basically in Portland in 1998. And since then, it's had a pretty precipitous rise in popularity, with about 80,000 members in the U.S. in 2005. It's used for a variety of purposes. I always find that it's the IKEA trip that is the dominant car sharing trip purpose. I know when I used Zipcar in D.C., it was always my friends calling me and asking me, can you take me to IKEA? I don't know if that's true for everyone else. Trader Joe's also is a good destination. So transit riders are going to be among the major users of these services. It provides a last mile service, so you get to your transit destination and you have somewhere else to go after that. It's also for bulk shopping and the occasional trip to the coast or what have you. It's also a tool for people who do have a car, but they don't always have the right car for the right job. So if they want the convertible to go to the beach, or if they want the SUV to go to IKEA, they can use it for that purpose. So the obstacles to growth that I find in the car sharing industry is that you can only use it for a round trip. So you have to drop it off where you picked it up, and you have to know how long you're going to take it out for. So it's relatively inflexible in that way. The size of the current fleet is also an obstacle, and I think the biggest obstacle is the obstacles to market penetration. So car sharing is not always being used where it's most appropriate. It has the potential to steal some market share from basically all the other modes. I think taxi is a big one where they could take some from transit use. It's frequently touted as getting people out of car ownership, so it needs to find a way to make itself more present in people's minds when they're thinking about the transportation system. And one major way that car-sharing firms are finding they can increase their market share is through partnerships. So major transit agencies are probably the major partners of car-sharing firms. Strategic location of their vehicles at transit stations is a big key. Also partnerships with universities where I think PSU has a variety of programs. I know that the faculty and staff can get free flex car hours if they don't have a parking space. I think that's how it works. Car sharing agencies also have partnerships with municipalities. They get a lot of their parking spaces from those municipalities, and they may or may not pay for them, and that's been sort of a hot topic in City Hall in the last year or two. But I think that a major point is that there needs to be more comprehensive integration in order for car sharing to grow beyond its current niche. And the larger transportation payment problem is that there are many, many different ways that we pay for our transportation. We have to use different tools to pay for it. We have to learn different systems. We have to have accounts and passwords and logins for everything under the sun. So for parking, we have to have either a smart card, or we pay with cash, or we pay with a credit card. If a toll system or a road user fee system, like we've been toying with in Oregon, comes to place, that'll be a whole different set of accounts. We pay for fuel. Transit is currently on a paper-based system here, which is rapidly becoming outdated. Taxis, you have to often pay in cash. They're not always very happy to take a credit card. Car sharing, you got the special smart card, and that's the only thing that'll work for you. And if Commissioner Adams' dream of having a bike sharing program in Portland comes to fruition, then we'll have probably another set of accounts and systems there. So, as I see it, the up-and-coming candidate for a unifying technology is RFID payment, which is radio frequency identification. And that's the same thing that we have in our PSU ID cards, if you have the one that you swipe to get into the building. It lets you identify yourself from without any contact. So unlike a credit card, we have to swipe it. This is something you just bring near the reader, and it reads it from a distance. And the biggest opportunity, I think, in RFID that's coming up is the explosion of these new credit card payment systems. So Visa has a program that's not as popular in the U.S., but it's more popular in Asia, I think. American Express is rolling out its Express Pay system. And MasterCard has been, I think, the most active in the U.S. With their PayPass system. And if you go to Regal Cinemas, I know you can pay for your movie tickets that way. You can often buy gas with PayPass. And this example, MasterCard was a partner with the FIFA World Cup in Germany, and they developed a wristwatch PayPass, which I thought was a pretty cool idea.
Swatch has them.
Oh, do they? Okay.
For ski lifts, too.
It's also used for ski lifts. You can do your ski identification that way.
And transit in Italy.
Right. So, but there are lots of other forms that these things take. It's not just a card. It's not just a watch. Citibank now has a little key fob. Lots of places have RFID cell phones. Down in the left corner, there's a stuffed hippopotamus that's activated for using the Seoul, South Korea transit system. And people have even gone so far as to have them implanted in their hands. Some people who are really into this technology have set up home security systems where they have an RFID chip implanted in their hand. So this could take any number of forms in the future. There is an international standard for these kinds of communication technologies, and they standardize the frequency, the power, and the transmission protocols. And all of the American Express, Visa, MasterCard have agreed to use the same basic parameters. So they're all relatively compatible with each other, which provides a lot of opportunity for places like Portland to develop a partnership with them. So here's the proposal. The proposal is that we develop a single smart card or something else with an RFID ID, that we develop it in an incremental way, so we don't ask everyone to get on board right away. We let them join as they see fit. We also don't say, this consortium of people is going to have a unified card and no one else can join. It should be open to everyone, and it should be voluntary. One of the major divisions in how you approach these kinds of systems is, do you want it to be a centralized system or a decentralized system? So in some regions, all the different agencies, be it transit agencies or whoever else is participating, they may each have their own accounting system, and then they'll pay each other back when someone uses the card on their system for another purpose. The centralized system would involve a clearinghouse, so you would have a third entity who would, either one of the entities involved in the consortium or a third entity would perform the collection function and then do the redistribution. And as I see it, and looking at the experience of different regions around the world, a centralized system is much preferable, just cuts down a lot of the hassle. It's very expensive and burdensome for one agency to try to do that itself. So I submit that we want to get a third party, perhaps Visa or MasterCard, to do this for us. I also think that this kind of program should coincide with major system improvements that are already taking place. So I know that TriMet has told me that they are foreseeing a payment system upgrade in the next 5 to 10 years. TriMet's constantly adding new rail lines. That would be a great time to do some of these developments. If the road user fee takes off, that would be a great time. A toll road would be another great time. If the City of Portland parking system upgrades its relatively new system, that would be a good time. And all of these other things as well. Also from TriMet, they did look into having a smart card program, but it got tabled with sort of a change of political administration in the region. And I think they also dedicated the funds that they were considering using for this purpose to their advanced vehicle location system, which I think was probably a wise choice. So they do expect an upgrade in 5 to 10 years, and they've done some initial numbers on how much this would cost. And this is a high-end estimate of around $30 million. which is pretty much consistent in terms of order of magnitude with what regions around the country have experienced. So I've also been looking at as many examples from around the country and the world as I can find where this has worked for a variety of purposes. So the Seoul example that we had earlier with the stuffed hippopotamus has they've had some of the more colorful. They've had necklaces, they have cards, they have key fobs, they have all kinds of different mechanisms for getting these things in people's hands. It integrates the transit systems, their parking, even convenience stores, museums, vending machines, and internet purchases. It's basically a one-stop shop for them. In Bremen, Germany, the Bremer card is the transit card they have, as well as the London Oyster card, have integrated their transit pass with their car-sharing firms in the regions. And they get a single monthly bill, they get discounts when they shop among these different modes, and they always get the lowest fare calculated based on, because sometimes it's a promotion, if you use it a certain amount, it'll calculate your lowest fare based on how much you actually use it, not how much you predict that you'll use it. And sometimes there's just a flat-out discount for using the electronic payment to begin with. These don't include the outside shopping functionality like the T-Money does. New York City has been undergoing a trial with Citibank and MasterCard on one of their lines, and there's a key fob or a card that you can use to swipe yourself onto the subway system. And the interesting thing in my mind about this test is that they are able to save money on the credit card transactions by waiting a few transactions and then adding them all up, making them one big transaction. Seems like a great way to save money on that kind of operation.
Question?
Yeah.
Is that per person or per person multiple transactions or per turnstile transaction?
Per person, so you accumulate your transactions over the day or the week, however many, and they'll often, I think it costs $2 to ride, they'll often charge you every $10, I think is how it works out. I think they've also made it so that you can swipe in and then pass it back and swipe your friend in to add extra functionality there. In Washington, D.C., the Smart Trip card's been pretty effective in making transit more friendly. I know that I never used to ride the bus in D.C. until they started accepting Smart Trip because I never had exact change on me. Parking, they've also made all of their park and ride parking garages Smart Trip only, so they're really pushing that on those folks. And they also have a Citibank partnership that's been in effect, I think, for several years. I saw one article in a journal, or I guess it was just a magazine, that suggested that they had a test pilot integrating themselves with Zipcar, and that would be an option for people in the region at some time thereafter, but I haven't heard anything else about it. But it sounds like that's on people's minds, which I think is a very good thing. I also found some not so great examples. The Bay Area has, for several years now, been trying to integrate all of its regional transit agencies, of which there are many. And they had some major setbacks in that BART was trying to start its own smart card system, and BART and Muni, the two major agencies in San Francisco, don't currently accept it. I think there's only 2 authorities that actually accept the system at this point. So it's been a long time in the works. It's cost a lot of money, and not many people have signed on to it. Also in Honolulu, they decided they were going to go for this, so they awarded a $2.2 million contract, I think, for a smart card that would integrate all of their buses. And they got a bit into it and realized that they had not budgeted for the backroom operations, which is part of the reason why I'm advocating for giving that to someone else to handle. So they canceled the project after spending $1.1 million on equipment, and I think they're now trying to sell off that equipment because they have no use for it. So basically, I'm arguing that payment media is getting higher tech and higher tech, and this is going to happen whether we like it or not. So we might as well take advantage of it quick a manner as we can. Portland's going to have an advantage in that this has been tested in other places, and the public-private partnerships are not a new idea in this arena anymore, so we have an opportunity to really cash in on that. And so here's the more contentious point, I think, is car sharing. Should car sharing be the most vocal advocate for this project? I think that it would become folded in eventually, but I think that as it stands in other regions, they've been an afterthought, and I think they should make sure to be at the leading edge of the process rather than an afterthought. So my questions for you is the car sharing emphasis useful at all in this discussion? Are there important examples that I'm missing from my battery of examples? And also, are there other analytical methods that I can use? I started out trying to look at something about car sharing behavior or people's behavior using integrated payment methods, but the data just really wasn't out there. So I'm sort of at a loss for how I can make this more quantitative. I'm pretty comfortable having it be a qualitative analysis, but it's always nice to have something that you can map. Yeah.
The question that I was going to ask before you put in the slide was just about ROI. So
Return on investment?
Yeah. So you had the chart of how much it would cost to implement it for the bus system. So, if they did implement it, what would be the return on investment for them?
I think that certainly depends on what you include. My conversation with the folks at TriMet, one of the major benefits that people like to talk about when they talk about smart card transit payment especially is all the rich data sources that you're going to get out of it. And it's very hard to put a value on rich data sources.
And just as a rider of the bus, that creeps me out.
Oh, yeah? Okay, well, that's another point that there is an increasing, or at least an increasing visibility of privacy considerations. And I am reasonably confident that people are going to grow more comfortable rather than less comfortable with that idea. If you really think about it, it's very hard to remain anonymous and off the grid these days. And I personally am happy to let a transit agency know what my travel patterns are, because that is going to mean they're going to give me better service, I hope. Wendy?
I think kind of along those lines, though, I know that a lot of smart cards right now, and I know that passports are providing personal information. And I could easily see you being like, oh, look, you can use a smart card for transit, for going to the dentist,
Sure.
So where is that line drawn?
Where's the line? Well, and they're also
And how do
looking
you
at
detect that?
smart car-enabled passports, which I think is a really interesting thing. I did see, as I was bopping around the internet, there's someone who's marketing an RFID envelope so that you stick your card in and it blocks reading from a distance. Exactly, yeah. But that's
Passport
a very
does
good
that.
question. What's that?
The current passport, when you close it, it
Oh,
does
okay.
that.
Interesting, okay. Rob?
In terms of return on investment, smart cards save boarding time.
Right.
So every second that a transit agency saves on boarding time is a second they save on running time, which is a second they can put somewhere else in more service, either on that line or elsewhere in the system. So there's a direct impact on service time. And also, transit agencies have huge cash handling costs. And some of the numbers I've heard about losses, cash handling losses at large transit agencies, it's huge percentages. So the cash handling, it seems to me, would be another advantage that would be a direct dollar value.
For sure, yeah. Yep.
Did you get a sense from TriMet about what led them to shelve their project?
My understanding is that the advanced vehicle location system was a higher priority at that time for them to do something with their money. And I think that in retrospect, it's opened up the opportunity for them to take advantage of some kind of private partnership that they might not have been able to do at that point. So, yeah. And there was also talk about change of politics in the region. So that's always a consideration. Todd?
Yes. Here's some other examples. You know, the Bike Link card, the prepaid bicycle parking card. It's used in the Bay Area,
Okay.
San Diego, and Vancouver.
Interesting.
Santa Clara in California uses the same card for bike parking, car parking, and small purchases at the city hall.
Okay, and is that, are they separate entities?
No, it's the city. Basically, it's kind of like the company builds the lockers, so that's like Microsoft building a PC.
Sure.
They also provide Bike Link, which is the OS, the operating system, and the payment system. Additionally, Bike Station allowed me to use my FlexCar key card as my RFID card for the Seattle Bike Station. They just programmed it so I could have one card and multiple users, multiple
So there was, you
accounts.
didn't need any permission from, or collaboration from FlexCar for that purpose?
No, they just
Interesting, they just
made
scanned
that,
it and then
yeah.
made it,
Additionally, I think the limitation for the previous question on, I think you only have 4 accounts on an RFID card typically,
Okay,
or, excuse me, on a smart card.
sure.
Regarding the new inverse system in the Flex cars, have you talked to them about?
I don't know a whole lot about the actual technology that FlexCar is using.
Maybe
but-
Dave behind me knows? Dave,
My understanding is that with these RFID cards, there are several systems. It's not one.
Right, it has
It's
room
one
for-
ISO standard, but there are several systems.
Sure.
And the car sharing companies, like every other, like the transit agencies, like the parking people, they're all picking the one that's cheapest to them. And because there isn't, a big kahuna that says
Right.
you will use this.
Right.
Everyone's sort of going it alone, I think, and that's a problem. That what Todd just said about the ability of a system to basically read the code, I think has got a lot of potential. FlexCar has always said that if a city like Washington D.C. Did have a standard, they would
Adopt
make
it.
their cards available to it. There are multi-system RFID cards that could operate, like the Metro and FlexCar, but nobody sort of stepped up to the plate to make it a high enough profile.
Sure. I sort of just wonder, why do you even need all the different accounts on one card? Why couldn't you just, because I mean, like the example that I think of is the airport, where you can put your credit card in as you enter the parking lot, put your credit card in again as you exit the parking lot, and that's not an airport account on your credit card. It's just your credit card number, basically.
I think it's a function of whether you're using the card as an identification tool, which is what Todd was describing for the bike thing, or if you're actually, like those chip cards that Todd was showing, those are stored value cards.
Right.
And I think that's a big difference.
That's true.
And are the chip cards, they're all contact, they all require contact. There are contactless chip cards, but I've never actually seen one.
And they have,
used.
sometimes you'll have a contactless card that also has the chip in it, right?
I think my question for Dave and FlexCar was, are they moving towards the new inverse system will allow like a prepaid card to have a value on a card instead of having to get billed at the end of the month?
No, I don't think so. They're going to go the same direction Zipcar did, which is, or what you described for the subway. And I think Zipcar is doing this too, where they are billing more, like once a week. And if you take several trips in a week, they're going to wait until the end to run your charge, because they save money on the processing fee if they can gang a couple of your uses together.
I was curious about security with the smart cards, if you know, without a PIN number or password or signature, how do you ensure?
Again, so there's a couple of different concerns about security. It's some people are afraid that you'll be able to read their card from a distance as you're walking by, I guess, which is a great concern, I think, and hence the protective jacket idea. And did you have something you want? Cloning, okay, just catching it as it goes by? Yeah. And then the other concern is just if someone gets a hold of it, and can they use it? And I don't think it's more risky than the credit card, because credit cards, you sign and then that's basically it. I mean, I could sign your name on your credit card bill and it would probably be okay. Yep.
I think they're getting around that now by limiting the maximum purchase.
Right.
I think it's like 10 or 20 or 30.
$25 is the one I've seen. Is for purchases under $25, you can use MasterCard PayPass, and then for something above that, it's more complicated. Yep.
If I could make an observation, I think it's as much the perception of security as it is the actual violations
Sure.
of it.
That's true. John.
I suppose one of the ways that an agency like TriMet could benefit financially would be to recover some of the loss from fare cheats, such as on the MAX.
Well, that's been in. Oh, do you have more? Or?
Well, it's kind of a two-part question. So, is that something? I'm assuming it is something that you could talk about. The other thing is, along the same lines, a lot of the people who are fare cheats are people who don't have a lot of money to begin with,
Sure.
for various reasons. So if you move to a centralized system where it's almost a universal card, like a credit card, then you're talking about somebody having an account and credit worthiness. Then you get into different classes of users.
Sure.
Is that something you can address?
Well, this brings to mind an experience I had at the Bicycle Advisory Committee. We were talking about the bike share program and how it would be like the card would be tied to your credit card and blah, 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 blah. And the immediate reaction was, but what about those of us who don't have credit cards? What about those of us who don't believe in credit cards? And so that's going to be an issue, I think, in any situation. I wonder if you couldn't have a service center where you could get something prepaid like they do with cell phones. And for the however many people that, I wonder what share of the market that is that would actually need that service. It could be pretty easy to solve. And then was there a second half?
Prepaid MasterCards. They're
yeah,
everywhere.
Yeah. Yep.
And for those of us who don't use debit or credit card that we often use, sorry, okay. For those of us who don't have debit or credit cards,
There's food stamps.
Yes.
So you get a food stamp card
Sure.
that is basically a debit card, so that could work. And yes, you can buy prepaid things at Kmart. So
Dave?
Probably on the order of people, who don't use debit or credit cards. But if I were looking around, I would also be looking at somebody like Starbucks who's got a card that's everywhere. It is not a RFID card,
Right.
but the Flex card, Starbucks card. So anyway, I think that it's going to be somebody, it's going to be a third party that is going to sort of overlay, and Citibank has
Sure.
been trying, MasterCard's been trying for 10 years at least to do something, and this is their latest attempt. So.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely a problem, but I think it's most certainly not an insolvable problem, and that someone will solve it very soon. Todd?
Yeah, back to the question about, I guess, equity and access. Also, I think people with money don't like to use transit because they've really gone to a cashless system. Look at all those people buying stuff at Starbucks, a latte on a credit card, which is insane, or at the grocery store, one item.
Yeah.
So a cashless system, maybe the parallel example would be Portland's experience with the Schlumberger pay stations. The return on...
The parking stations?
Right, the parking stations, their return per meter has gone up 30 to 40%.
Really?
Part of that is because people's propensity to pay with plastic is much higher than coins. People really don't have
Sure.
that much coins in their pocket anymore, or the habit of carrying.
That's the way I live, yeah. Yes.
So I kind of have a two-part question here. First off, you mentioned obviously public transportation and flex car. What other private firms are interested in using a technology like this, specifically in Portland?
Specifically in Portland.
And then in addition to that, there looks like there's an opportunity to, if you have a centralized, one centralized card or method of payment for a metropolitan area, it looks like there'd be a great deal of an opportunity for return on investment if a city government or a metropolitan regional committee would take control of coordinating all this and being that centralized unit. Or why isn't a private firm seeing that opportunity and utilizing that?
That's always a good question, asking if something's going to be taken care of by the private sector, why hasn't it already happened? I don't know that I have an answer for that. I think that the transit agency is probably the major hurdle. Getting TriMet to come on board will be, I think, what makes or breaks the whole thing. I know that from my conversations with Bill Scott, I think he's made efforts to be closer knit with TriMet, and TriMet's not been that interested, has been my understanding. And the first question was what other people in Portland would be interested in. My hope is that once it's become known that TriMet's doing it, that City of Portland Parking is doing it, and that anyone can join, then the taxis will join. And as the new road user fee comes out, that will be on there. Anyone you could imagine, I hope, would be the target audience. Jennifer?
Just one quick observation. I think one advantage, particularly in comparison to the Bay Area, the TransLink disaster, I mean, the issue there, as I understand it, has largely been, you're dealing with 25 or something different transit agencies.
Right.
It's interjurisdictional. It's not necessarily a technical problem. It's just the politics and they just can't get along, especially when you have BART and you have big ones and small ones. And so one advantage of this region is not having at least that level of conflict to do.
Well, and the lesson that I took away from the BART experience was that they tried to get everyone on board right away, right? And that just didn't work. So the way I see the Bay Area thing going is these two agencies that are currently using it will keep using it, and then people will start joining on one by one, and it'll build momentum that way. But
you mentioned taxis. I'm just wondering how realistic that is, because taxi drivers, in the first place, don't really enjoy credit cards. And I don't really
in Portland,
know.
yeah.
Well, and the tipping option on a flex car like that, I think, would be hard to do. And
possibly.
I
don't know why it would be impossible, though. It seems like a pretty easy technological fix. But punch in a number in a keypad or something.
So you just tell them the added on number that you'd want there?
I mean, or there's a keypad in the passenger compartment, and you just pass it.
Could automatically suggest the appropriate
Yeah,
tip.
it can calculate your tip for you. Todd?
Yeah, I think you were also discussing like models. It's almost too bad that maybe Earl Blumenauer's Commuter Act couldn't include a subset to have a nationwide transit or mobility card, so that much like we all write checks, they all get shuffled around physically into these regional clearinghouses. Why can't transit agencies have that for trips?
Right.
And in a sense, you have one card for flex car and car sharing and transit, and you could use it regionally or nationally.
Yeah, well, there's a TCRP report on this subject, and that's one of the sections that they go into is how would you get intercity, interstate, national, international integration. So that would take probably action on the national level. So, yeah.
Any more questions?
Todd?
Just a quick comment.
Yeah.
The problem with having too many RFID cards is that they tend to cancel out each other in your wallet.
Right.
So that's a future user problem, because I have like a zip car and a flex car key card, and when I have them in my wallet, I can't get into a car.
Really? Okay. Because I use my...
You need to hold your wallet up to the thing. If you take them out, they work fine. Right. Okay.
Yeah. I can still use my PSU badge with my flex card in my wallet, but I don't know if that's a specific problem to different applications.
Okay, with that, before we thank our two speakers today, I'll put in a plug for next week. We have, again, two graduating MURP students. Kate Lyman will be talking about travel time reliability, and Delia Chi will be talking about pedestrian crossing behavior.